My name is Elena Vasquez, and for 15 years, I was invisible in the mansion where I cleaned, cooked, and kept secrets. The Blackwell family saw me as nothing more than hands that polished their marble floors, and a face that never asked questions. What they didn't know was that every morning when I dusted their shelves, every afternoon when I organized their papers, every evening when I served their dinner, I was studying them. They had no idea that the quiet woman in the gray uniform, who emptied their trash cans, held an MBA from Wharton. They didn't know that before I became their shadow, I was Elena Vasquez, Senior Vice President of Operations at Morrison Financial Group, a woman who once commanded boardrooms and managed portfolios worth hundreds of millions. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and the day Mr. Harrison Blackwell died, everything they thought they knew about their invisible housekeeper was about to shatter like the crystal glasses I'd been polishing for over a decade. The story begins 15 years ago, when I lost everything in a single day. I was 32, brilliant, and ruthless in the world of corporate finance. My corner office on the 52nd floor of the Morrison building overlooked Central Park, and my signature was worth more than most people's annual salaries. I wore Armani suits, drove a BMW, and lived in a penthouse that made magazine covers. Then came the scandal. Morrison Financial Group collapsed overnight in a fraud investigation that made headlines worldwide. Not because I was guilty, but because I was the perfect scapegoat. The executives who had actually stolen millions needed someone to blame, and Elena Vasquez, the ambitious Latina who had climbed too high too fast, became their target. The media crucified me. My face was on every newspaper, every news channel, painted as the mastermind of a scheme I had actually tried to expose. By the time the truth came out 18 months later, it was too late. My reputation was destroyed, my savings depleted by legal fees, and my professional network had vanished like smoke. I was blacklisted from every major financial institution in the country. That's when I met Harrison Blackwell. He was 73, a widower living alone in a sprawling Fifth Avenue mansion with more rooms than he knew what to do with. His children had long since moved away, visiting only for holidays and when they needed money. He was lonely, wealthy beyond measure, and in need of someone to manage his vast, empty house. I answered his ad for a live-in housekeeper, not because I wanted to clean toilets, but because I was desperate and homeless. During the interview, sitting in his opulent library surrounded by first edition books and oil paintings worth more than my former salary, I made a decision. I told him my name was Elena Rodriguez. I told him I had worked in hospitality my whole life. I told him I was quiet, reliable, and invisible. I never mentioned Wharton, Morrison Financial, or the Elena Vasquez who had once been profiled in Forbes as one of the top 40 under 40 in finance. Harrison hired me on the spot. For 15 years, I became a ghost in his house. I woke at 5:30 every morning, prepared his breakfast exactly as he liked it: soft scrambled eggs, wheat toast with butter, coffee with 2 sugars, and laid out his clothes for the day. I managed his household staff, coordinated his social calendar, and maintained his massive home with the precision of a military operation. But I was always watching, always listening, always learning. Harrison Blackwell wasn't just wealthy. He was the founding partner of Blackwell Holdings, a private investment company that owned everything from luxury hotels to tech startups. His personal fortune was estimated at over $2 billion, but what fascinated me wasn't his money, it was how he managed it. Every morning, while he ate breakfast and read the Wall Street Journal, I would dust the shelves in his study. I memorized every document that crossed his desk, every phone conversation he had with his lawyers and financial advisors, every detail of his business empire. He never noticed that his quiet housekeeper understood every word of his complex financial discussions. He never realized that when I organized his papers, I was also analyzing his investment strategies. He never suspected that the woman who brought him his evening brandy could have run his company better than his own executives. Harrison was brilliant but old-fashioned. He kept physical files for everything: handwritten notes in leather, bound journals, and contracts signed with fountain pens. In the digital age, he remained analog, trusting paper more than screens. And I knew where every single document was kept. His children, Victoria and Charles, visited 4 times a year like clockwork. Christmas, Easter, Harrison's birthday in June, and Thanksgiving, they would sweep into the mansion with their designer clothes and entitled attitudes. treating me like furniture that happened to speak. Victoria, 45, was an interior designer who had never actually worked a day in her life. She lived off her trust fund and her husband's pharmaceutical fortune, spending her days shopping and planning charity galas, where she could play the philanthropist while donating other people's money. Charles, 42, was worse. He was a failed entrepreneur who had burned through 3 startups and millions of his father's money. His current venture was a cryptocurrency platform that existed primarily on paper and in his delusional dreams of becoming the next tech billionaire. Both of them saw their father as nothing more than a walking ATM machine, and they saw me as the Mexican cleaning lady who should be grateful for the privilege of serving their family. Elena. Victoria would snap her fingers at me during her visits, never bothering to learn that I wasn't actually Mexican. The guest bathroom needs fresh towels. Elena, Charles would bark, bring me a scotch. The good stuff, not the cheap liquor you probably drink. I would nod, smile politely, and fulfill their requests, while mentally calculating exactly how much money they were wasting on their pathetic lifestyles. Victoria's handbag cost more than most families' monthly rent. Charles's watch was worth more than a luxury car. And neither of them had ever created a single dollar of value in their entitled lives. But Harrison was different. Despite his wealth, despite his position, he treated me with a respect his children never showed. He learned my birthday and gave me bonuses. He asked about my health when I was sick. He never raised his voice or made demands. He made requests, always prefaced with, please, and followed by, thank you. More importantly, he trusted me, not just with his house, but with his secrets. Over the years, Harrison began sharing things with me that he shared with no one else. His disappointment in his children, his concerns about his business, his fears about growing old and dying alone. You're the only person in this house who doesn't want something from me, Elena, he told me one evening when he was particularly melancholy. Victoria wants my money, Charles wants my business, but you just want to take care of things. That's rare. If only he knew. The truth was, I didn't want his money or his business. What I wanted was something far more valuable. I wanted to matter again. I wanted to use my brain for something more challenging than calculating the optimal ratio of bleach to water. But I also, somewhere along the way, began to care about Harrison Blackwell. He was brilliant, kind, and desperately lonely. His wife had died 20 years ago, his children were parasites, and his friends were mostly dead or dying. I became not just his housekeeper, but his confidante, his companion, and in many ways, his family. Which is why what happened next would hurt so much. 3 months ago, Harrison's health began declining rapidly. At 88, he had been remarkably vital. But age finally caught up with him. He developed heart problems, circulation issues, and the kind of fatigue that signals the body is shutting down. His children's visits increased dramatically. Suddenly, Victoria was flying in from Los Angeles twice a month, claiming she was worried about Daddy's health. Charles started showing up unannounced, saying he wanted to spend more time with his father before it was too late. But I knew what they were really doing. They were circling like vultures, positioning themselves for the inheritance war that was coming. The family meetings became more frequent and more heated. I would serve tea and pastries while they argued about Harrison's will, his business succession plans, and who would control what when he was gone. They spoke about him like he was already dead, dividing up his empire while he sat in his chair, growing weaker by the day. The foundation needs to be restructured, Victoria would argue. Daddy, you can't leave millions to charity when your family needs security. The business should be sold. Charles would insist. I can't run Blackwell Holdings, nobody can. We should liquidate everything and distribute the cash. Harrison listened to their arguments with tired eyes, occasionally nodding, rarely speaking. The man who had once commanded respect in boardrooms across the globe was being bullied by his own children into making decisions about his legacy. And through it all, I remained invisible. I served their meals, cleaned their dishes, and listened to every word they said. They discussed Harrison's finances, his health, his mental capacity, and his death as if I wasn't in the room. To them, I was just the help, no more worthy of consideration than the furniture. But Harrison saw me. 2 weeks before he died. He asked me to come to his study after dinner. He was sitting behind his massive oak desk, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen him, but his eyes were still sharp. Elena, he said, I need to tell you something important. I sat down across from him, folding my hands in my lap the way I had learned to do 15 years ago, when I first started working for him. I'm dying, he said simply. The doctors give me days. Maybe a week or two if I'm lucky. My children don't know yet. They think I have months left. But I wanted you to know first. My heart clenched, but I kept my expression neutral. I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwell, don't be sorry, he said. I've lived a full life. I've built something meaningful. I've loved and been loved. The only thing that saddens me is what's going to happen to this house, to my business, to everything I've worked for. He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Victoria and Charles are going to destroy everything, he continued. They're going to sell Blackwell Holdings to the highest bidder, liquidate my investments, and blow through their inheritance in less than 5 years. Everything I built will be gone. I wanted to tell him he was right. I wanted to tell him that I had overheard Charles talking on the phone about a buyer for the company, or that Victoria had already been meeting with real estate agents about selling the mansion. But I remained silent. That's why I've made some changes to my will, Harrison said, sliding the envelope across the desk. Changes that my children don't know about. I looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. Elena, in 15 years, you have been more loyal to me than my own blood. You have cared for me, protected me, and never once asked for anything beyond your salary. You have been the daughter I always wished I had. Tears began to form in my eyes, but I blinked them back. I can't leave you everything. That would create legal problems for you that you don't deserve. But I can leave you something that will ensure you never have to clean another toilet or take orders from ungrateful people again. He leaned forward, his voice becoming stronger than it had been in months. In that envelope is a copy of my revised will, along with some other documents you'll need. Elena, I'm leaving you 49% of Blackwell Holdings. I stared at him in shock. It's not controlling interest, he continued. But it's enough to ensure that Victoria and Charles can't sell the company without your approval. It's enough to guarantee you a voice in every major decision. It's enough to make you one of the wealthiest women in New York. I couldn't speak. There's also a trust fund with $50 million, a pension that will pay you $200,000 a year for life, and this house. The mansion is yours, Elena. Every room, every painting, every piece of furniture that you've cared for all these years. My hands were trembling as I reached for the envelope. But more importantly, Harrison said, his voice becoming gentle, there's something else in there, something I discovered about you 6 months ago. My heart stopped. I know who you really are, Elena Vasquez. The room seemed to tilt. After 15 years of hiding, of pretending to be someone else, of burying my past and my identity, he knew. I've known for months, he said kindly. My lawyers do thorough background checks on everyone who works for me, but it took them years to piece together your real identity. The name change, the career in finance, the scandal at Morrison Financial. I know all of it. I felt like I was going to be sick. I also know, he continued, that you were innocent. My investigators found evidence that the real perpetrators at Morrison framed you. Evidence that was never presented at trial. Evidence that could clear your name and restore your reputation. He pointed to the envelope. It's all in there. Financial records, emails, depositions from witnesses who were paid to lie. Everything you need to prove your innocence, and sue Morrison Financial for wrongful termination and defamation. I was crying now. Something I hadn't done in 15 years. Why? I whispered. Why are you doing this? Harrison smiled, and for a moment he looked like the vital, powerful man I had met all those years ago. Because you're brilliant, Elena. Because you've been wasted scrubbing floors when you should have been running companies. Because you deserve justice. And because I need someone with your intelligence and integrity to protect what I've built from my own children. He leaned back in his chair. Victoria and Charles are going to be furious when they learn about the will. They're going to fight it, contest it, and try to destroy you. But they have no idea who they're dealing with. They think you're just the cleaning lady. They don't know they're about to go to war with one of the sharpest financial minds in the country. That night, after helping Harrison to bed, I sat alone in my small room and read every document in that envelope 3 times. The will was ironclad. Harrison had used the best lawyers in the city to structure it in a way that couldn't be contested. The evidence of my innocence was overwhelming and well documented. And the financial statements showing my new net worth were staggering. In a single day, I would go from invisible housekeeper to one of the most powerful business owners in New York. But first, I had to survive Harrison's death and the war that would follow. Harrison died peacefully in his sleep 4 days later. I found him that morning when I brought his breakfast tray, and for the first time in 15 years, I allowed myself to grieve openly. I sat beside his bed and cried for the kind man who had seen my worth, when everyone else saw only my servitude. Then I dried my tears, straightened my uniform, and called his children. Victoria arrived first, flying in from Los Angeles with her husband and a team of lawyers. Charles drove up from Philadelphia with his wife and their financial advisor. The mansion filled with black-clad relatives, crying crocodile tears and speaking in hushed tones about their beloved patriarch. The reading of the will was scheduled for 3 days later. During those 3 days, I maintained my role as the invisible housekeeper. I prepared meals for the family, cleaned up after their meetings, and listened to their conversations about how they would divide up Harrison's fortune. The company should be sold immediately, Charles insisted during one family meeting. We can get $2 billion for it, maybe more if we shop it around. I want the art collection, Victoria announced. And the house in the Hamptons. Charles can have the apartment in London. What about the staff? Someone asked. Daddy always said we should take care of the people who worked for him. We'll give them generous severances. Victoria waved dismissively. 6 months' salary should be more than enough. The housekeeper can have a year since she's been here so long. They were talking about me like I wasn't in the room. Which was nothing new. But what was different now was that I wasn't the powerless woman they thought I was. I was Elena Vasquez, and I was about to remind the world who that name meant. The morning of the will reading, I woke up before dawn and did something I hadn't done in 15 years. Instead of putting on my gray uniform, I dressed in a black Armani suit I had kept hidden in my closet like a talisman from my former life. I styled my hair, applied makeup, and looked in the mirror at the woman I used to be. Then I went downstairs and prepared breakfast for the Blackwell family one last time. At 10 o'clock, Harrison's lawyer, James Morrison, no relation to my former company, arrived with his team. The family gathered in the main living room, the same room where I had served countless dinners and cleaned countless messes. I stood at the back of the room, still invisible, still ignored. Morrison cleared his throat and began reading the will. The initial bequests were standard: charitable donations, gifts to longtime employees, small trusts for grandchildren. Victoria and Charles listened with polite attention, waiting for the main event. Then Morrison reached the core of the will. To my daughter Victoria Blackwell, Harrison, I leave the sum of $10 million, to be distributed over 10 years in annual payments of $1 million each. Victoria's face went pale. $10 million was a fortune to most people, but it was a fraction of what she had expected from a multi-billion-dollar estate. To my son Charles Blackwell, I leave the sum of $10 million, to be distributed over 10 years in annual payments of $1 million each. Charles shot to his feet. That's impossible. There must be a mistake. We're his children. Morrison continued reading, unmoved by the outburst. The remainder of my personal assets, including all real estate, art, and investments, totaling approximately $800 million, I leave in trust to my longtime companion, and the most loyal person I have ever known. The room held its breath. Elena Vasquez, chaos erupted, Victoria screamed, Charles threw his coffee cup across the room, family members shouted questions and accusations. Lawyers frantically shuffled through papers, but Morrison wasn't finished. Additionally, I leave 49% of Blackwell Holdings, valued at approximately $1.2 billion, to Elena Vasquez, with the understanding that she has both the intelligence and integrity necessary to preserve and grow the company I have spent my lifetime building. Through all the shouting and chaos, I remained standing at the back of the room, perfectly still. Where is this Elena Vasquez? Victoria demanded through her tears. We've never heard of her. This must be fraud. Charles was pacing like a caged animal. She's some gold digger who manipulated a dying old man. We'll contest this. We'll prove she coerced him. Morrison looked directly at me. Ms. Vasquez, would you please step forward? I walked slowly across the room, my heels clicking on the marble floor that I had polished thousands of times. Every eye was on me, but for the first time in 15 years, I wasn't invisible. Victoria looked confused. Elena, the housekeeper, what does she have to do with this? I stopped in front of Morrison and extended my hand. Thank you, James. I believe you have some documents for me. My voice was different. Not the quiet, subservient tone they were used to, but the voice of a woman who had once commanded boardrooms. Morrison handed me a leather portfolio. Everything is in order, Ms. Vasquez. Congratulations. I turned to face the room, and for the first time in 15 years, I allowed them to see who I really was. My name, I said clearly, is Elena Vasquez, not Rodriguez, not the housekeeper. I am Elena Vasquez, former Senior Vice President of Operations at Morrison Financial Group, MBA from Wharton School of Business, and now apparently, your business partner. The room fell silent. Charles found his voice first. That's impossible, you're the cleaning lady. I smiled, and it wasn't the polite, invisible smile they were used to. It was the smile of a predator who had been hiding in plain sight. For 15 years, I have cleaned your messes, served your meals, and listened to your conversations. I have watched you waste money, disrespect your father, and plan to destroy everything he built. I have remained silent while you treated me like furniture, like hired help who didn't deserve basic human dignity. Victoria was staring at me like she was seeing a ghost. But you were right about one thing, I continued. I was hired help. I was hired by your father to manage his household, which I did with the same precision I once used to manage $100 million portfolios. The difference is that Harrison Blackwell recognized my value. He saw what you were too blind and too arrogant to see. I opened the portfolio and pulled out a document. This is a financial analysis I prepared of Blackwell Holdings 6 months ago, when Harrison asked for my opinion on the company's future. Would you like to know what I discovered? Charles was turning red. You had no right to. I discovered. I interrupted, that under better management, Blackwell Holdings could be worth $5 billion within 3 years. I also discovered that your plan to sell the company to Meridian Capital would result in the immediate firing of 800 employees and the liquidation of assets that took your father 40 years to build. I pulled out another document. This is my counteroffer to Meridian. They've agreed to pay $3 billion for the company, contingent on unanimous approval from all shareholders. Victoria's lawyer whispered something in her ear, and her face went even paler. But as of today, I continued, I own 49% of Blackwell Holdings. You, Victoria, inherited 25%. You, Charles, inherited 26%. Which means that without my approval, you cannot sell this company. Charles lunged toward me, but his lawyer caught his arm. You manipulated him, he screamed. You tricked a sick old man. Your father, I said calmly, was the most intelligent man I've ever known. Even dying, he was 10 times smarter than you'll ever be. He didn't leave me this inheritance because I manipulated him. He left it to me because he knew I would protect his legacy from his own children. I walked over to the mantelpiece, where Harrison's portrait hung above the fireplace. Harrison Blackwell built an empire based on integrity, innovation, and respect for his employees. He created thousands of jobs, funded dozens of charities, and made the world a better place through his businesses. And you wanted to sell all of that to buy yourselves bigger houses and faster cars. I turned back to them. That's not going to happen. Victoria finally found her voice. We'll fight this. We'll contest the will. We'll prove you're unfit to. To what? I interrupted. To run a business. I've been running businesses since before you learned how to spend daddy's money. To manage investments. I've managed more money in my career than you've ever seen, to make difficult decisions. I've been making life and death decisions about this company while you were shopping and playing entrepreneur with your trust fund. I pulled out the final document from the portfolio. This is my business plan for Blackwell Holdings. 5 years, 3 new acquisitions, expansion into emerging markets, and a projected annual growth rate of 12%. I've already begun implementation. Charles stared at the document like it was written in a foreign language. You see, I continued. While you were planning your inheritance spending sprees, I was planning how to honor your father's legacy. While you were counting money you hadn't earned, I was studying the business your father built. While you were treating me like I was invisible, I was preparing to become your boss." The room was dead silent. Morrison cleared his throat. "If there are no further questions about the will, I believe we're finished here." Victoria stood up shakily. "This isn't over." "Yes," I said simply. "It is." As Harrison's relatives filed out of the room, shooting me looks of hatred and disbelief, I remained standing by his portrait. "Thank you," I whispered to the painting. "For seeing me, for believing in me, for giving me back my life." 6 months later, I sit in the corner office on the 52nd floor of the Blackwell Holdings Tower, looking out at the same view of Central Park I once had at Morrison Financial Group. But everything is different now. I'm not Elena Rodriguez, the invisible housekeeper. I'm not even Elena Vasquez, the disgraced financial executive. I'm Elena Vasquez, CEO and majority shareholder of Blackwell Holdings, one of the most successful private investment companies in the world. With the evidence Harrison left me, I was able to clear my name completely. Morrison Financial Group paid me $47 million in damages, and the executives who framed me were finally prosecuted for their crimes. My reputation in the financial world was not only restored but enhanced. Victoria and Charles tried to contest the will, just as they promised. It took them 3 months to realize they had no case. Harrison's lawyers had crafted the document perfectly, and my qualifications to run the company were beyond question. They also tried to force a sale of Blackwell Holdings, but without my approval, it was impossible. Eventually, faced with the choice of working with me, or getting nothing, they accepted their roles as minority shareholders. Victoria now sits on the board of directors, where she has learned to treat me with the respect she never showed when I was cleaning her father's house. Charles runs our venture capital division, where his enthusiasm for new businesses is finally channeled into something productive instead of destructive. They're not happy about the arrangement, but they're learning to live with it, especially since the company's value has increased by 40% under my leadership. The mansion on Fifth Avenue is now my home, not my workplace. I've converted Harrison's study into my private office, and every morning I sit at his desk and make decisions that would have seemed impossible when I was scrubbing these floors. But I haven't forgotten where I came from. Last month, I established the Harrison Blackwell Foundation for Economic Justice, dedicated to helping people who have been wrongfully accused of financial crimes. We provide legal support, investigation services, and financial assistance to rebuild lives that have been destroyed by false accusations. I also started a scholarship program at Wharton for undocumented students who want to study business. It's called the Elena Rodriguez Memorial Scholarship. Named after the woman I pretended to be for 15 years, the woman who taught me that sometimes you have to disappear completely before you can become who you're meant to be. The foundation's first recipient was a young woman from Guatemala who had been working as a nanny while putting herself through community college. She reminded me of someone I used to know. Today, as I review quarterly reports that show record profits across all our holdings, I think about the lessons Harrison taught me during those long years, when I thought I was just keeping his house clean. He taught me that true wealth isn't about money. It's about using your resources to create something meaningful. He taught me that respect must be earned, not inherited. He taught me that intelligence without integrity is worthless, but integrity without intelligence is powerless. Most importantly, he taught me that being invisible isn't always a weakness. Sometimes it's the greatest strategic advantage you can have. For 15 years, I watched and learned and planned while everyone around me saw nothing more than the help. I absorbed information, studied patterns, and prepared for a moment I didn't even know was coming. When that moment arrived, I was ready. Victoria and Charles learned too late that the quiet woman they had ignored and dismissed was actually the most dangerous person in the room. They discovered that their careless words and careless attitudes had been observed by someone who understood power better than they ever would. They learned that respect is not given based on your last name or your bank account. It's earned through competence, intelligence, and character. They learned that the people you overlook are often the ones who end up overlooking you. And they learned that being invisible isn't the same as being powerless. It just means your power is hidden until you choose to reveal it. As the sun sets over Central Park, casting long shadows across my office, I open the bottom drawer of Harrison's desk, where I keep his final letter to me. It's separate from the will, personal and private, written in his careful handwriting. Elena, it reads. By the time you read this, you will have discovered that the last 15 years were not wasted time. They were preparation time. You were not hiding from your destiny. You were preparing for it. Never forget that the woman who scrubbed my floors was the same woman who is now running my company. Never forget that invisibility was your greatest weapon, not your greatest weakness. And never forget that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is serve others until you're ready to lead them. You were never just my housekeeper, Elena. You were always my successor. I fold the letter carefully and put it back in the drawer. Tomorrow, I have a board meeting where we'll be approving the acquisition of Morrison Financial Group. The company that destroyed my life 15 years ago will become a subsidiary of Blackwell Holdings, with me as its ultimate owner. The executives who framed me are long gone, but the building where I once worked in fear and disgrace will soon display my name in the lobby. It's not revenge. It's justice. It's also proof that no one is ever truly powerless, no matter how invisible they might seem. Sometimes you just have to wait for the right moment to show them who you really are. And when that moment comes, you make sure they never forget it. Did you like this story of transformation and hidden power? Tell us in the comments which city you're listening from. If you enjoyed Elena's incredible journey from invisible housekeeper to corporate CEO, please support us with a super thanks so we can continue bringing you more empowering stories of women who refuse to stay small. Thank you so much for your support. We look forward to your comments about Elena's strategic rise to power. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that we highly recommend. There's so much more content on our channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story, with love and respect.